Hey, what's going on? My name is Albert Huang, and today I'm going to be talking about, well, this is episode 4, I think, of how to do liquid, or 3. I don't know. Anyway, and today I'm going to be talking about the figure 8. The figure 8 is a really big thing. I don't know if this audio is going to come out right, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway, because I'm lazy. Anyway, so here's what the figure 8 is. And, I could talk on like weeks about this thing. I mean, I could do a whole video series about this whole thing. Figure 8 is a really big deal, right? I'm going to teach you the basic mechanics of it, and I'm going to teach you different ways of thinking about it, I guess, because there are a lot of different perspectives on how to approach the figure 8, and like why it's actually important and what it has to do with everything else. So, first of all, let's do some really core mechanical stuff based on the figure 8. This is how I learned it, and this is sort of one of the only, just to give a little bit of history of the dance move, back when old Albert is going to talk about his old stories, about his old war stories when he was a raver back in the 90s. But basically, you go to any rave, and it would just be like some really good dancers, and then some mediocre dancers, and then like everyone else was just like hopped up on ecstasy. Seriously, this is all they do. They would skip. I don't know why skipping is better than hopping or whatever, I'm not really sure what that's about. They would skip and they'd do the figure 8, and that's sort of the only dance move that was, I think, very iconic of that era. There's so much resonance in it. Anyway, I'll go on to the mechanics of it. This is the way I learned it, and there are a variety of other ways to learn it. Repeat these 3 moves, and you might want to actually download this video and go over this outside of YouTube, simply because it's easier to engage with that stuff that way. Anyway, here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. All right, I'll do that again. 1, 2, 3. That's all it is. That's all the figure 8 is, right? So the first 2 moves, your wrists are together, and during the transition from the first to the second, your wrists don't move apart, right? That's 1 and 2. And the third move is where things get a little bit weird. Instead of going, this is where you sort of separate this joint, this connection here. You go into this, right? And this is the third position. And then you go back to 1. So for me, I'm going to do like most right-handed people do. Right hand goes on top first. In fact, I'm going to mirror you, so why don't you go ahead and, I'm going to do left hand, but I'm going to say it from your perspective. So right hand goes on top first, so you're mirroring, you're not actually, right. And then you switch to left hand on top, and then you go back to back, and then you transfer back to right hand on top. Now what this means is, first of all, this is going to be confusing for me because I'm going to get left and right all mixed up. Anyway, what this means is, this is one way that you will know when you're doing it wrong. If you have at any point your hand going in, so you have this circle from your chest through your arms to your wrist joints. If your hands ever go inside that circle, like this, see, that's wrong. You always want your figure 8 to be drawn outside of this arm circle here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And when it goes fast, it starts to look like an 8. And I'll go over that a little bit more detail right now. So basically, you have 1, 2, and 3. So once you get those 3 pieces down, not worrying about transitions, then you can start really pushing more of a shape, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 1. So a lot of people have this transition problem from 3 all the way to 1, right? Sorry, 2, 3, 1. That's a weird transition. So here it is, 2, 3, 1. Another way to think about it is that your right hand is going under like that. So if you just stay here and do this shape with your right hand, a circle. That's all you're doing. You're creating a circle. And then you just sort of follow with your left hand. And then it just happens, right? You just follow. Great. So 1, 2, that one's easy, right? Because that just sort of goes up. And then 3. Now here, you could just follow that circle and go across, but usually in practice, by the time you get there, you draw that circle downward, right? This is what causes that 8 shape. And another way that people actually learn that, so with that instruction, you should be able to just construct this thing. So between 1 and 2, you go on the up, and then between 2, 3, and 1, this is getting confusing, but on the second half of that, you go down. So you're on the up stroke, so you go 1, up, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And actually, I would consider it, just to make it balanced, a 4-step move. It's just that we don't actually talk about this position because it's so obvious. Everyone can get to 1 to 2 really quickly, but to really break it down so that the meter is even between 1, 2, 3, and 4, we go, another way to describe it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And once again, remember, your hands never go inside that. You're never doing that, right? A lot of people want to take the shortcut where they go 1, 2, 3, and then to get to here, instead of bringing their left hand in front, they bring their left hand behind. So the wrong way looks like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. See how my left hand, once again we're mirroring, right? My left hand goes behind. You want your left hand to go in front. And it's going to feel awkward in the beginning, and that's where a lot of people get messed up. But, so that is the way to learn the figure 8 in that particular, with that particular set of instructions, right? But after you sort of, basically I learned it that way and it was really useful, but it's sort of, you get into the music and it goes, and you see that it's called the figure 8 for a reason, clearly. There's this 8 that you're creating. You're creating this shape, right? And so that's actually another way that people teach it, another way people learn it, is that you take your right hand and you carve an 8 with your, as if your pinky were a knife, right? And you carve that into space, right? And when you get good with that, you carve that 8 in front of your body. And when you get good with that, if you do that slow enough, you can just sort of attach your left hand and just slam it on top so that your hands are in opposition. Your hands shouldn't be like this or like this. I mean, you can play with that later on, but to begin with, you want your hands to be sort of opposite one another. So when your right hand carves with that pinky, your left hand is just doing the opposite thing. And then you'll find out here, when you're carving the downstroke, you sort of do a pivot, and then your left hand still maintains opposition, right? So usually when you do the 8, you actually go up and down, but for explanation, I'll show, and you can definitely do this too, but for the explanation, I'm gonna sort of keep a fixed point where my wrists are, just so that you can get an understanding of the relationship from hand to hand, right? So notice how my hands are always on the opposite side of the rotation, like of the axis of rotation, basically, right? There are different types of things you can do like this, or what? Oh God, yeah. There are different ways to approach that, but the classic H shape is when your hands are in opposition. And this, once you get that down, there are a bunch of other ways to think about the tempo of that movement. One is just up, down, right? So, and this goes back to that classic raver style dance where you go, all you're doing is like transitioning from this shape to this shape with like a really pretty movement thing. And when you do that, notice how most of the 8s are actually pivoted on the wrist, but you can even pivot on the elbows to some extent. It gets kind of ugly unless you're really good at it, and I happen not to be. So anyway, and this thing, I mean, that should probably be enough instruction. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments. But that should probably be enough instruction for you to be able to understand the basics of the 8. But why am I spending so much time on this weird thing, right? I mean, it seems like a lot of this liquid stuff has nothing to do with innate, right? It's this weird, it's totally on a different plane space as this stuff. Now, that is a little unfair because the stuff that I've showed you so far, the hand wave and the rail, are very, I mean, they're sort of, I would say those are in opposition, right? The hand wave, I had a friend describe it to me once that the hand wave and all the rail stuff, all this work is you're creating a shape that is like from here, that goes from wrist to wrist across the fingers, right? And then there's another type of movement in liquid that's sort of across this dimension of your hands, right? So a lot of the stuff that people learn in the beginning is across this dimension, but right now we're discussing this dimension from here to here, right? And if you think about just like you take this shape and you spread it out as wide as you can, that's actually what you're doing. Now you have this really wide shape and you're creating this 8 with it. And when you're creating the 8 with it, you're just moving that shape around really quickly. Now that's the thing, because this stuff, right? This stuff can move really laterally, really quickly, and it has a lot of places it can go. And then if you want to reverse it, you just sort of go in the opposite direction. You just lead with the other hand. Now this stuff, if you want to make it more complicated, or, you know, I guess this sort of hand wave is what I'm talking about. If you want to make this hand wave more complicated, you want to go really dig in, and that's actually, so here, check this out, right? So here's the hand wave in this dimension, right? And here's a hand wave in this dimension, or a finger wave, I guess. I don't know what people call it. But if you want to really carve that out, watch what happens when I carve this out really big, right? I'm going to start over. Boom, boom. I'm going to get bigger and bigger as I go along. See, it's this like weird thing here, right? It's this really curvy thing going on. And then, as I get even bigger, you're going to notice a pattern emerge, right? All of a sudden you have this thing. I mean, let's get really big, right? Look at that, it's an 8. Look at how easy that is, right? So what the 8 allows you to do, it allows you to gain a very dynamic motion of this dimensional movement without having to travel, which can be very useful in a lot of cases, right? So now you can go up and down, and if you slow it down, and if you experiment with how much space you have between complete opposition and complete parity, or I don't know what that's called. But yeah, complete opposition, which is the classic 8 that I was telling you about earlier, and then you get a little bit closer with your index fingers, then you can start playing with some other shapes. But anyway, this axial this motion is super important to sort of the philosophy and foundation of liquid for a variety of reasons that I haven't really thought of before starting this video, so I'm going to just start winging it. But I have talked about it to some people before. First of all, a lot of liquid has this really like inward-looking and like self-referential feeling about it, which, I mean, for better or worse, is like its own thing, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that everything is rotating along sort of internal axes. And what I mean is, when you're popping or gliding or whatever, a lot of your movement has to do with like moving across space, right? But with liquid, a lot of the movement has to do with like being, when I say axial motion, it means like you're rotating across something that's internalized, right? Like this is a part of me. And then when I do like all this other shapy stuff, it seems like I'm pivoting across things that are under my control, as opposed to this locomotive like popping thing where I'm moving across space differently. Even when you're popping in small ways, you're sort of still engaging with space in more of like a a movement-based, or I don't know, a locomotive form. So anyway, a lot of this like study of axis is really important when it comes to liquid, because it's sort of like a wow, I'm gonna get crazy metaphysical here. I said a little bit of Tai Chi, and there's this like idea of energy, and the idea that like you can sort of groom it and prune your energy and make it sort of grow better over time. And by having this, you'll notice that a lot, if you take Tai Chi or a lot of other martial arts, you'll notice that there's a lot of really weird rotational stuff going on. You talk in circles because circles are really efficient in the human body, right? Because when you're popping from here to here, like it's really cool and striking, but it is, I guess the most efficient way to get from point A to point B is this linear motion. But when you have to recover from point B to go back to point A, the least efficient way is to go linearly. Because if you go from point A to point B and point B back to point A, you're doing work and you have to undo it immediately, right? And if you figure out some way to make it more of a rotational thing, then that means you can take all of your the energy that you're pushing forward into it and recoup some of it as you sort of rotate it on an internal axis that you control. Wow, that's crazy weird talk. But anyway, the reason, so yeah, all this is really important in liquid because when you're, this principle of internal rotations sort of permeates throughout a lot of the shapes that you tend to see in liquid. And even like, I would say a lot of like the finger boxing stuff that's coming out, as it's being incorporated into, well, I wouldn't say, the liquid perspective of that style, and I'm not even going to get into the histories of all of that stuff because I don't know much about it, but a lot of this stuff has to do with, you identify an axis, a point right here, and you rotate across that axis, right? This isn't specifically limited to liquid, of course, because there are a lot of other styles that do this, and a lot of tutting has that thing too, right? As you can see, like here, I'm gonna pivot here, oops, pivot, 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 pivot. And so, there's this question, there's this sort of like permeating question of like, to what extent can you pivot in an efficient manner? How visible does that efficiency become? How can you, how can you connote that efficiency in a form of joy through this dance, I guess? And like, these are just questions that I've thought of a lot. And that's sort of my relationship to why this 8 is so important. Because it is a conservation of energy. It's this internal, and you listen to electronic music, it's just like, you're just grinding along the same fucking beat over and over again, and it gets really boring if you're not into that. But if you are into this, like, this sort of, this infinitely reflective space that electronic music can sometimes be, it's like when you stand in front of two mirrors, a mirror here and a mirror here, and you like stick your head in and you can see infinity of yourself, right? It's sort of that feeling of like, that's what this is all about. It's this like cyclical ritual that we perform to sort of summon some, I don't know, internal life forcey shit. I don't know. I can't explain all of it. I'm just telling you my experience, that this is a very, very important part of the culture as we had it. And it's actually really funny because I went to a dance event recently where there's some really sick glovers. Now gloving is this different style that has, it's basically I believe every glover, like they buy gloves and then they have LEDs on the fingertips. I don't really know much about the scene more than like I've been to a few events or whatever. And they have a lot of like cool rotational stuff and a lot of like in your face like effects that occur with their with the LEDs, and it's usually, my understanding is that it's usually, they're like, you can give each other shows, which is a throwback to when I went to parties back in the day, and at these shows, you know, it's just like me and you say, hey, can you give me a show, and then you're bugging out on drugs or whatever, and I do a show for you or whatever, and you get crazy because you, I mean, you just have a really weird, awesome time because I'm like shining lights in your tripped out face, right? So, there's a lot going on there, but what's really amazing, what I found out was that I was talking to some guys that were pretty good, and they didn't know about this figure 8, and I tried to teach him, and he like did that classic mistake where he put his hand inside, and I was like, wow, this is something that's like super important that I think most people, like, if you get in that space, you really might want to know about this thing. The ramifications, I'll give you some more practical ramifications right now. A lot of this, like, this stuff, when it gets advanced, it like starts to really fold in on itself in weird ways. In ways that, like, I would have a hard time explaining what I just did there, right? But what I know is that in my gut, I have a very strong relationship to that figure 8. And that all this weird, like, gnarly, liquidy stuff has to do with that 8, right? I made this I remember making that revelation a long time ago where I was like, where you basically do these, but you do them so tight on top of each other that it just sort of spins around. I don't really, once again, I can't quite explain what is going on here, but I can say that this is absolutely related to this shape, right? It's sort of this shape, but instead of your wrists together, it's your fingertips together. And I wouldn't suggest you start doing that because it's going to look messy, and it's still, it feels messy on me, and I constantly sort of work on cleaning it up. But you can get some really crazy, gnarly shapes when you learn when you have a really clear understanding of that 8. Yeah, I mean, I guess what it is, what it really works as is that the human body would like to make circles in this particular, cyclical form of music, dancing. Sorry. When you're dancing to this type of music, it only seems natural that because it repeats so frequently that you might want to be doing circles, right? That you might want to be backing, like, sort of coming back to the same idea that you were at just a moment ago. But the fact of the matter is, when you're using your hands together, you can't really hit a circle and then return completely back to where you were in an elegant way, and that's what the 8 solves, right? The 8 solves the ability to do a circular motion and sort of reset yourself in a way that doesn't like consistently add momentum in only one direction. It like adds momentum and then sort of accounts for it on the backswing. And that idea is really important sort of everywhere with liquid. So study your 8 and incorporate it into as many things as you can. Yeah, and just groove out. I don't know. Thanks for watching. Yeah, let me know if you got questions. Sweet. Peace.